the seed for a bamboo tree. You plant it, and you cultivate it, and you water it, and you make sure the soil is good, and you try every day to make sure that it's going pretty well. Well, it takes about 3 to 5 years before the seed finally sprouts and goes above and breaks land. Now, the moment it breaks through, it grows 4 to 5 feet tall in about a month. Now, what I want to help everybody understand is that it didn't take a month to grow 5 to 8 feet. It took 3 to 5 years before it got there. So I say all that, we do the work, and sometimes we can get, a little bit, we can become frustrated, sometimes we can feel burnout, but we can ask ourselves, what I'm doing, does it matter? Does it help me? Well, it is. And so what we've also been able to identify is that when you do work in your space, and you do work in your space, and you continue to create these spaces where people can use storytelling and use narrative and create inclusiveness, that those who need it most, they're honored because they see representation of themselves. But for those who need to be more inclusive, they start to see as a community, we're holding everyone accountable. It's, hey, we're all doing this work, you should too. And so I use all that to segue into our panel discussion, because we're talking about how Gainesville as a community, we're all doing work. We're all doing work in different spaces for different reasons, but all of it is to create a more equitable community, right? And so if I could have our 3 storytellers, our 3 panelists come up, I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves and tell what it is that you're here to talk about. And as a community, we're going to just open a space where you can talk about what you've done, and if anyone in the audience has questions and want to learn a little bit more, we want to engage in them too. So can I have our 3 panelists come up, please? Round of applause for our panelists. I love the way you brought your chips. Like, yes, you can bring chips. You don't have to be like this, please. This is a working lunch, right? This is the way we do. All right, so one thing about how I facilitate, I am an instructor, but all I do is facilitate knowledge. I help to do that. So we don't dump information into you all. As a community, we all have something to pull from. So if at any point, if you see something or you hear something that you would like to contribute or a question you would like answered, feel free. Together we learn from one another. So we learn from the panelists also learn from the participants. So we're all in the same plane. All right, so I'm going to get out of the way because I've talked enough and I just want to facilitate. So I'm going to hand you the mic. Just tell who you are, what you do, and what you're up here sitting for, the reason.
Hi, I'm Karin Fields. I am a mental health professional here in town. I run a private practice called LCS Integrative Counseling. I am also a clinical assistant professor at the University of Florida in counselor education. And I'm kind of representing on this panel mental health, specifically trauma, a trauma-informed community, and what it looks like to engage mental health and trauma and kind of emotional health in a way at the community level. And that's me.
Hi, my name is Nicole Harris. I'm a teacher at Gainesville High School. I'm also the founder and director of Canes on the Mic Poetry Club, and it is a literary arts and civic engagement organization that is countywide. And today I speak not really fully as a teacher, but about inclusive recreation. I come from Miami, Florida, and sometimes when I tell my students how much I love Gainesville, they all give me really confused looks, and they can't understand why. And what I have found is that some of the opportunities, the entertainment, the concerts, not everyone has access to the information, and not everyone feels like they belong. So a city where people feel like they not only can have gainful employment, but they feel like they have a seat at the table, not just where you work, but where you play, is a part of your well-being in the city. So I'm here to represent inclusive recreation.
Good to see you again. Jacob Larson, and I'm a community pastor at a church. The iteration of that over the last 5-ish years have been loving on the location through the Bowl downtown. It's a beer and wine pub. I like to call it a pub, invoking the public house where everything is shared in the community in that space. So I continue to say yes to really great ideas that people come and bring to me for ways for the community to show who they are and express themselves through the arts or through other means and storytelling. Yeah, I know wear other hats, but I'll just stick with that one.
I love that. So I'm gonna leave the microphone with you all because I can project a little bit. I hope you all can hear me. I wanted to start the panel discussion off with you all are doing amazing work within the community and have been doing it for some time. And so I want everyone that's in here, we may be people who are thinking about getting off of the couch and figuring out what that contribution is. So if you all feel inclined, can you talk a little bit about what was the spark that inspired you to get out of the house, to get off of the couch and say, this is something that's important and it needs to be done, so I'm going to do it, or be a facilitator to get that done? What was that spark for you?
Mine was reluctant. It was a reluctant spark. I had a good friend who I would process these things with as the invitations came up. I felt really strongly to, for a while, 2002, so for about 5 years, I felt like I had to stay in the office and didn't realize some of the freedoms that I had. So this might be helpful. One of the first freedoms I did was starting my day at a local coffee shop every Thursday for about 2 hours and meeting with a friend, and we would read through different editorials or watch a YouTube video. We'd come kind of prepared, or we'd read through a book together, and we talked about community engagement in 2007 for about 4 months from 7 to 9. And I didn't think I had permission because I also didn't want the person who was my friend and boss to feel like I was, not showing up at work. So having done that, my friend just said, hey, just ask your boss if that's okay for you to start your day like that. And it was part of the scope of my job. But just getting out and meeting consistently in a space that put me into the community was really helpful. And it was in that space, it was magic in this, I always feel like it's magic when this kind of stuff happens, but you would overhear conversations of other people with projects and ideas. You'd collaborate, we'd started to encourage each other. So over that 6 months, there was about 4 other projects that people were doing downtown to try to help facilitate the quality of Gainesville. And we kind of grew up together and birthed these things together, and were able to support one another. And through that community, that was a big catalyst and continued support when you felt like, oh man, I just made the best event that no one ever came to. And it's like, oh, that's okay, give it 3 more months. And so that tribe that developed out of that space was really helpful.
When I was in Miami, in elementary school, I used to do these oratorical contests for the district where we would memorize poetry and we would have contests. And I was like in kindergarten, first grade, and they were like just district-wide competitions. And then in high school, I did a poetry slam. And then when I went to college, I used to go to the Poe Jam. There was United Civic Media Center. And when I graduated, I went back home and I joined a poetry troupe. I used to travel and perform in all kinds of spaces. And when I came back to Gainesville, the first day of school, my second year teaching, I'm now in my 6th year, I just had a tab on my website, like I named it Canes on the Mic because we were hurricanes. And I told my students, yeah, I'm a poet outside of class, and one day we'll have a poetry club here. But I didn't really know what would happen or what would take off. So then the next year, this one kid, he's my co-founder, Adrian Dixon. I tell this story all the time so I can say it. He was the bane of my existence. This is the kid who, during my observation, would get up and dance. And so the next year, he said, oh, were you serious about starting that poetry club? And I was like, I don't know, I guess. Today's the club fair, we don't have a poster or anything. And then him and his friend got together, put their 50 cents together, bought a poster at the library, and the activities director at the time let them have a poster. They signed up their friends, and we had our first meeting. And I thought that the kids would need a lot of help with poetry, that maybe we weren't going to be too good, but that was fine because that was my job. I'm an English teacher. And what happened is when they first started sharing poetry, they were really, really good. And I realized they just didn't have an outlet at all. And this type of youth poetry shows and slams, it already exists in the major cities. It exists where I'm from in Miami. It exists in New York. It exists in Philly. There are heavily funded groups in all of these places. But North Central Florida, that's just not a thing. And talking about inclusive recreation, if you will, A lot of my students, it's open to everybody, but a lot of them are Black and brown. And the assumption is that, I'm going to see the movie Freedom Writers, but the assumption is that I'm Erin Brewell and I'm rescuing street kids from LA and teaching them how to write. And the narrative is actually different. The narrative is actually a lot of these Black and brown kids are really smart, are in AP classes, but all of the artistic offerings do not culturally respond to who they are. So they come to Poetry Club every Thursday and they know literary allusions that I don't know as an English teacher, and they're referencing, you know, I'm not no Icarus, but they're referencing Icarus and like all of these like Greek things, and they know this stuff. They read poetry more than I do. The kids like poetry more than I do. People say, poetry's your passion. I'm like, no. Helping kids discover that is my passion. And last year, one of our pinnacle highlights is some of the kids co-led a panel here at Story GNV and also doing TEDxUF. And these are kids who have never had this experience. So kids who would have never been heard get these experiences. And I train them as a performance coach, and they come to rehearsals, and they're trained as emerging artists. So that's what got me out of the couch, is just looking and seeing, when people see that these kids who don't usually have a voice in Gainesville, there's no teen spaces in Gainesville. We get in trouble all the time because parents are like, what, you're having your event at a pub? At the bowl? And we get phone calls, I'm like, okay, am I gonna have my job? But it's worth it, But even with that, some of the kids, and I'll shut up after this, some of the kids have been born and bred in Gainesville, and they didn't know that the bowl existed. They didn't know that there was, at the Harn Museum every second Thursday, that there were, you know, these events. So being able to perform in these spaces, things that like all of us can just go to Gainesville, like the festivals downtown. Some of these kids have never gone, even though they're free, because they don't feel like they belong, or the barriers to act. You know, there's barriers. The Phillips Center, you know, there is a $10 discount for UF students. For some of my students, it's hard to afford the $35 ticket. And through partnerships, they have a great education coordinator at the Phillips Center who brought us in, gave us tickets, and helped us, and let us, you know, do things with the artists. So just the exposure, because if I wasn't exposed to poetry as an elementary school kid in competitions, this organization wouldn't exist. So.
For me, I think I've been a mental health professional for the last, while, 12 years, and that was great, and I liked it, and I was, pretty good at it, and I had a niche that worked for me, and then relationships in life happened, and I think what's really powerful for me, and I think where some of my passions are now, and why I'm so interested in collaboration more now than I think I ever have been, is through relationship and experience, right? So when something that always worked for you doesn't work for you anymore, and you start realizing there's more out there, right? So for me, it happened more from a personal level. My family is a family with adopted children, and through that process of adopting children, we understood much more about attachment, much more about trauma. And even as a mental health professional, these are things I knew, and these are even things I worked with some of my clients in, but really feeling our own needs, feeling the lack of understanding, really spurred me on to try to make connections with other people who were doing this better than I was, right? Like, I wasn't doing this wasn't my niche. And so I think that really sparked my desire to figure out who's doing what's already happening. Because my previous tendency, and I was kind of a business owner, an entrepreneur, so my thought was always, oh, well, we'll do it, instead of really saying, wait, who's doing this, and who's doing this well, and how do I collaborate with already existing entities instead of trying to create things myself, kind of that throwing the event that nobody comes to, right? That there are things already taking place. And so I got connected with things like Empowered to Connect and Marty Gillen, who was speaking today on really understanding attachment and trauma in children. I'm connected to Partnership for Strong Families and my desire to get more connected to the juvenile justice system, and really helping, really being a part of processes that are already in place that are understanding this connection between trauma and behavior, and how our traumatic experiences change us. And so that's really where, at this point, where my heart is and my passion is how do we help other people understand the impact of trauma? And I think Culturally speaking, societally speaking, we're seeing trauma in front of us all the time on television. And people's lived experiences of trauma being exploited. And all these different things where we're faced with our own traumas too. And so I think what really is exciting to me about being a part of Gainesville and living here is that there are entities in place, organizations in place that are doing some really phenomenal work. And what I love about Self-Narrate and about this conference is the idea of pulling people together, right? So there are mental health professionals that know a lot about trauma, but are totally disconnected from populations of trauma, right? There's something wrong with that, right? There are people who have tons of lived experiences about working with, let's say, kids from hard places, but don't know how to get them services, right? And so figuring out where those gaps are is something that, when I think about the future, and I know as a part of this, and where we are now and where the future can go, is really what would it look like for all of these different people with passions and hearts for understanding trauma better and for giving people space to share their experiences and their stories safely, that we would be a community that would foster that in Gainesville, that there would be safety in that.
So you really jumped into to what my next question was going to be, and all of you have expressed some of this to a different extent, but with the issue that you're here to discuss, where do you feel we are in Gainesville, maybe why we're here from your perspective, and where we can go moving forward? Whoever wants to jump on that first.
So I have to tell myself I'm not going to get it all out in 2 minutes. So I don't know what type does that in your conference, but I have to kind of plan it. Okay. So where we are now in Gainesville, I'm going to use an anecdote. When I was in college, I grew up on PBS. Thanks, Mom. So there was this group. First, it started out with 3 Motenas. And they were African-American men who sang 7 styles of music in one show. And then they had 3 Modivas. So they sang, opera music, R&B, Broadway, everything. And because I grew up, on PBS, I'm going to the show. I'm like 20 years old. My friends were like, well, what are you doing? Why are you going to this? Why are you so excited about this show? And I'm like, you don't understand what you're missing because I was raised on PBS. So I went to the show, and then I went to the pre-performance discussion. We're talking about 10 years ago. And the guy, Marion J. Coffey, who was in charge of the show, directed the show, he was actually from Gainesville. I didn't know that. And so he's speaking to us about his show and what sparked him to even start it. And he grew up at the Phillips Center. And he says that he remembers a time when his family couldn't come to that side of town. So the beautiful irony in him being commissioned at the Phillips Center after that being it. And I remember also meeting 2 girls, one of them who are still my friends now, who was at the show too. Not because they were raised on PBS, but one of their professors couldn't go and gave it to them, and they had a blast. And in thinking about that question, coming from Miami, I really love Gainesville. And to a lot of my friends in Miami, there's one street light here, and can I challenge you to a duel? That's their perception of Gainesville. I had one friend that told me, oh, you're better than me. I don't know how you do it. I'm like, I'm just living in a place, and the perception, I think, is really unfortunate because, even today, there's 3 or 4 things that we can do. And a lot of times it's about information. So I'm always at a thing. I'm at a conference. This is one of the best conferences in Gainesville. Legit, it is one of my favorite things to do in Gainesville. There are open mics on certain nights. Shameless plug, Monday nights, the Bowl. There are all kinds of things. There's a night of dance today. I went to the Latino festival. There's so many things, and so many of them are free. I'm having a blast in Gainesville, okay? But when I go to these spaces, I'm usually one of 4 or 5 that look like me. And a lot of the time, that happens because where is the information? Where's the access to the information? A certain website is not necessarily the place where you're going to get that information. So I used to be very critical of some of the people of color that were here. As I'm gonna put myself on, we're telling stories, right? And I used to be like, I find things to do. I don't know why they're not finding things to do, like, that's on them. And then I started to talk to people, because now I'm in the community, I'm not just a student, you know, and talk to locals, and they're like, you have to understand that we don't feel like we belong. Or one time I went in this particular space and I was told this, or I was looked at like this. That's a history. So why we're here now, I think it's a history, you know, that has yet to be reconciled and to be publicly acknowledged. You know, certain spaces that have been dominated by one style of music, for instance, there needs to be a risk and say, hey, we're going to put this style of music here, you know, and I have to give it up to Brandon, who does So Far, who is always looking for different types of music to expose people to, you know, to say you belong here at the table. You know, if you're on the planning committee for this cultural whatever board of the whatever, you know, you need to invite someone who's from the actual neighborhood, who has roots there. You know, it's not always about bringing in an outside expert, but realizing that there are experts within the communities, and they don't always have degrees, and that's okay. They're sometimes more of an expert. So I think that's where we are now, having to open up more seats at the table, and someone who has unconventional ideas and more radical ideas, or spaces that don't look conventional, you know, and not just saying they're the other, but no, they're a part of us as well. So I think that's why we're here now, just not reconciling very real history that still is very hurtful to a lot of people. And I had to pull myself back and say, wow, I can't judge people for not going to this free concert or going to this, because their barriers are, the grandfather or the mother who's still alive, who remembers their experience when they went to this space as an elementary school person, is still alive and is still here. So I think that's, as far as recreation and all of us enjoying the concert and the festival together, that's where we are.
I'll answer this from kind of my perspective as a novice business owner. I did nonprofit my whole life, and then it's real hard to turn it into like also make money and do good at the same time. And looking at downtown, so I've been here since '94. I was a student and pretty much never left Belgrade. And I've watched our community continue to move into the space of embracing the Innovation Hub and bringing in businesses. I know we've got businesses now that have moved from Denver, Chicago, California. And I also know that there's some concern from our community. The Chamber of Commerce sponsored, I think, 3 years ago or 2 years ago, along with some of our city commissioners, to go to Austin, Texas, because they wanted to know what happens when your city starts aggressively growing, and what do you wish you would have done, Austin, who at that point was getting 380 people a day moving in, your infrastructure completely shut down and gloated, a 25-minute commute turned into an east side minimum wage job commute in Gainesville, which is about 2 hours. Little plug for needing to fix that. So they, the mayor, kind of off record, but said something along the lines of, we've lost our culture. Like we have displaced people in our community, people of color in our community, that we will not be able to remedy. So having that as a backdrop, and because I get to talk to so many great people that are part of the pub, I overhear things, I meddle and ask questions, and hopefully sow seeds of loving derision against forces that would keep people from loving others. So that's fun. Don't tell everybody that. So as our city starts to develop, and it is, and our downtown grows, and it will, I'm concerned about the type of downtown that will grow. I'm concerned that the neighborhoods nearby that we are neighbors to, because I figure if you move in later, you're their neighbor, and you figure out how to be their neighbor. You get invited to be their neighbor, and I'm concerned that we'll lose the history and the people that are their homes. And I'm concerned with how our city invests in our community, and I know we get tax dollars from development on other parts of our community, but East Side is still greatly under invested. We have a 50% third grade graduation rate on our east side of town. Again, with up to 2-hour commute for minimum wage jobs. Roadways are not taken care of. Infrastructure, AT&T won't put their fast internet out there because, to quote them, there aren't enough businesses to warrant it. So when you don't have roads and internet, you can, like, why don't we have businesses? So, and then also downtown, it's pretty homogenous. Like, there are monopolies happening, and people are kind of just putting the same business everywhere downtown. And I can attempt through my business to do as many diverse things, but I recognize I have limitations, and so I'm trying to function, pushing as far as I can within those. But I'm concerned that we don't have a good representation of our community within our downtown. I don't see everyone in the community of Gainesville to say, this is my downtown, and that's concerning. So all that is an opportunity to, as we move forward, it's kind of like pointing your telescope somewhere, like a little nudge and a couple light years away, like you're pretty far from where you would have been. So I think we can make little nudges as a community and as a city, the storytellings that help people to see where we are as a community can help to push those nudges so that when we're 15, 20, and 50 years down the road, we can see something more like, I feel like Depot Park, which is, I see people from all over Gainesville intermingling, and I just love the idea that somebody's walking away with a recipe and cooking something different that night because they're starting to cross cultures, and we're starting to mingle together, and collaborate together, and help to find jobs together, and sharing kids' lives together, and really change what our community is going to look like.
Yeah, I think going off of what both Nicole and Jacob have shared, when it comes to kind of some of the trauma and mental health that I'm interested in, and both have addressed what it means to be culturally responsive. And I think as more and more research comes out on what trauma is and what it isn't, and there are so many layers to systematic and historical and really just insidious, ambiguous, continual trauma. And that, there's a study called the early childhood, adverse childhood experiences, which is something that a lot of people are using now to understand trauma better from kind of a developmental perspective and how it affects you as an adult. And so many of those things on that list are joblessness of parents, moving around, not having electricity consistently, abuse, being exposed to violence, things that contribute to your makeup. I mean, they just contribute to who you are and how you're made and how you're wired and how you respond to things and how you engage. And so I think the next layer of understanding from a culturally responsive perspective for trauma is understanding how deeply rooted it is and thinking about it from this community specifically, really addressing the history that we sit on here and how that continues to influence the way we make decisions about where we go, who we go with, when we engage, when we don't, what that looks like. And so I think, marrying these three ideas is really where I hope Gainesville will go, and deepening understanding about people's experiences and how we can live in the same place and have a completely different experience.
So we have about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes for that hour goes by very fast, you can tell. And we want, I guess, to conclude the last question I have as a facilitator to the panel, but also extending it to the audience. It's more of a question that you all can feel free to answer, but also everyone here that's an active participant in this learning experience can be a part of it too. We started Story GNV because we recognized that through the work that we've done as a nonprofit, we met so many people. It started as business, healthcare, and education. So we said, let's bring everybody together to figure out how they're using story, how they're using narrative to better that industry. And then this is the first time we've done it where it's personal growth, organizational growth, and community growth, because we started to recognize when you bring in your whole self, you need to be, mind, body, and soul. And so we're talking about Story GNV, the story of Gainesville. And the last question, I guess, if a city had a beginning point and an ending point, thinking about the end in mind, just thinking, if Gainesville were to have its last day where we laid to rest, how would you like Gainesville to be remembered? Think of Gainesville as a person, as a human being, or as something that you could describe. How would you like Gainesville to be remembered?
A lot of the community is embracing the innovation. University of Florida is partnering with the city for kind of the first time ever investing into the community that it resides in. Tax rate. So being able to be an exporter of innovation, of a place that builds community well, and sharing that. So as much as we want to learn from others, but it would be fun to be able. That was a community that was really messed up, and they worked real hard and learned what it meant to break down the barriers and embrace, and they shared that with the world.
I would like Gainesville to be remembered as a city that preserved its history, a city that intentionally went on a dig to find all of the contributors that made the city what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word safe just keeps coming up for me. I would love for Gainesville to feel safe for all. So physically safe, emotionally safe, spiritually safe, intellectually safe. That just comes out, I think.
And one of the things that I think this really illustrates is that people, for the most part, live in Gainesville. We live here for a lot of reasons, but we live here because, for the most part, we like being here in general. And I mean, again, there's a lot of reasons, but every person has a different story. Every person has a different experience here. And when we listen to each other's stories, we can understand where the pain points are, where the things are going really well, what we can do to improve, what we can do to understand the history. I didn't realize that Butler Plaza was an airstrip. Like, that is really fascinating to me. But I also didn't realize that, Halloween and Christmas in Porter's and all that is, like you said, non-existent. Trick-or-treating isn't happening. And I personally learn from these experiences, I think, just as much as anyone else. So this is why these spaces are important. We can learn from each other. We can see how we see the world differently and come together and to create my own end to the story of Gainesville. See how we all created a community together, a community of people that cared about each other and cared about doing the right thing for everyone. So, Jaron, did you have any final thoughts as we conclude this panel?
Yeah, I think that we've all touched on this in all of our different spaces and all the different tracks that we've done. When you're talking about storytelling, it's making sure that not only you are able to express what your story is and you've honored that story, but you're also creating spaces for those who haven't had the opportunity to have a voice, being that ally so that everyone feels that they are empowered to have that same equity. And that's what we try to create here, and that's what we're creating. And we're hearing the stories of everyone, so that's beautiful. And so it's a shameless plug to those things in the back that are on the wall. You see that there are topics and there are stories and there are issues and passions that you may have. We encourage you all again to spend the next part of this time and throughout the day. If there's things that you want to discuss or things that you're passionate about, write them up there and put your business card up there, put your email address, and if you see something that you're personally attached to, or want to know more about, or feel like you have something that you can contribute to, please leave your contact information too and revisit it, take photos.
Figure out who those people are and create that tribe where we as a community continue to make sure that everyone has a voice and is allowed to bring that voice into the story of Gainesville. And it's an active part of the community and the city that we're continuing to grow.
Yep. So, on that note, thank you all for being a part of this panel, and thanks our panelists, Jacob, Nicole, Karin, and our next breakout sessions will be starting soon.